61, I stood at the end of my own driveway with a duffel bag in one hand and my keys in the other, and my wife stood on the porch with her arms crossed, not crying, not flinching, just waiting for me to leave. Her daughter stood just behind her in the doorway. Her daughter's husband leaned against the porch railing with a coffee mug like he owned the place, which, as it turned out, was exactly how he saw it. It was a Tuesday, November, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and stays. I remember the temperature because I had checked the weather app that morning out of habit. 34 degrees, chance of frost overnight. I had $180 in my wallet, a half tank of gas in my 2009 Chevy Silverado, and somewhere between the kitchen argument and the front door, I had become the problem that needed removing. My name is Ray Hollis. I was 61 years old when my wife of 11 years asked me to leave our house because her daughter and son-in-law needed a stable place to land. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I understood the impulse. Her daughter had gone through a hard stretch, lost a job, marriage was rocky, 2 kids under 5. I understood why my wife felt pulled. What I didn't understand, what I still struggle to explain to people who ask, is how that conversation ended with me being the one carrying a bag to the truck. My wife and I had built that life together in the most literal sense. The house on Carver Road was a 1970s split level that needed everything when we bought it. I rewired the second floor myself over one long summer. I replumbed the basement bathroom. I replaced the rotted sill plates along the north wall. Every weekend for 2 years, I had put something into that house with my hands. I was a licensed electrician for 33 years. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew every junction box, every breaker, every inch of conduit in those walls. When my wife's daughter and son-in-law moved in 18 months before that November, I didn't complain. I cleared out my workshop in the basement. I moved my tools to the shed. I gave them the larger of the 2 spare bedrooms for the grandkids. I told myself this was temporary, that family steps up, and that's what you do. What I didn't anticipate was her son-in-law. His name was Derek. 34 years old, unemployed since March, loud in the way that insecure men are loud, meaning constantly. He had opinions about everything, including how I had wired the basement outlets, even though he had never held a voltmeter in his life. He complained that I came home from work too late and woke the kids. He complained that my truck was too loud in the driveway in the mornings. He complained that the coffee I made was too strong. My wife listened. That's what I noticed. She didn't dismiss him. She didn't defend me. She listened and then she relayed. Ray, he says the morning routine is disrupting their sleep schedule. Ray, he says the workshop smell comes through the basement door. Ray, could you maybe park on the street so the kids don't hear the engine? I parked on the street. I switched to a quieter alarm. I started making weaker coffee and drinking it in my truck before coming inside. I made myself smaller one adjustment at a time, not because I believed I was wrong, but because I thought compromise was temporary. I kept waiting for things to stabilize, for Derek to find work, for my wife to see what was happening. She didn't. The final argument wasn't dramatic. That's the thing no one tells you about endings. They're not always explosive. Sometimes they're just flat and final, like a door closing in an empty house. It was a Sunday. Derek had decided, without asking me, to mount a new television above the fireplace. He'd used the wrong anchors for the brick, and I pointed that out calmly, technically, the way I would explain it to anyone. He didn't want to hear it. My wife stepped in and asked me to let him figure it out. I said someone's going to get hurt when that TV comes off the wall. Derek said I was always undermining him. My wife looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize at first, and then I did. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to say it. That evening, she asked me to sit with her at the kitchen table. Derek had taken the kids to the backyard. Her daughter sat on the stairs, just out of sight, close enough to hear. She said she needed me to find somewhere else to stay for a while, just until things settled, just until Derek found his footing. She said she knew it wasn't fair, but that her daughter needed her right now more than I did. More than I did. I was 61 years old, 11 years married, and I had rewired her house with my own hands. I told her I wasn't leaving. I said that clearly, directly, without raising my voice. I said this is my home and I'm not walking out of it because your son-in-law doesn't like being corrected about basic structural safety. She started to cry. Not the kind of crying that changes minds, the kind that redirects conversations. Derek came in from the backyard. He said maybe it was best if everyone took a breath. He said it in the tone of a man who had been waiting to say it. I looked at my wife. I asked her once, directly, if she was choosing this. She looked down at the table. That was my answer. I didn't pack a trash bag. I want to be clear about that. I'm 61 years old, and I've earned the right to a suitcase. I went upstairs, pulled my rowing duffel from the closet, and packed with the kind of careful precision that comes from 33 years of organized work. I packed my clothes, my medications, my important documents, my laptop, my phone charger, and the photo of my daughter from my first marriage that sits on the nightstand. I left everything else. I also did something else before I walked out. Something I want to mention because I think it matters. I went down to the basement and I photographed every circuit panel, every outlet, every junction box I had installed. I documented the entire electrical system with timestamps. Then I called my attorney. Not that night, it was Sunday. I left a voicemail, but I made the call before I left the property. I wasn't going to be erased without at least planting a flag. Then I went to the bank. Monday morning, 7:45 a.m. I was sitting in the parking lot of First Regional Bank when the branch manager unlocked the front door. I transferred my direct deposit to a personal account I opened that morning, separated my half of the joint savings, and closed my access to the shared credit card. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation, because I had been through enough to know that financial access disappears faster than apologies. My wife texted at 9:15. "Ray, that was not okay." I replied once. Neither was Sunday night. I didn't hear back for 3 days. The first week I stayed with my brother-in-law. My first wife's brother, a man named Glenn, who I had stayed close to over 15 years, even after my first marriage ended. Glenn was 67, retired, lived in a ranch house 40 minutes away with a guest room he used mostly for storage. He cleared it out without being asked when I called him that Monday morning. I slept on a pull-out couch for 2 nights before he found a proper bed frame in his garage and set it up. Glenn didn't ask too many questions. He made eggs in the morning and we watched the news, and that was it. He said once, sitting at his kitchen table with his coffee, "You built that house, Ray." He said it like a statement of fact, not a question. And that was the most comfort I received in those first 2 weeks. I went to work every day. I've been an electrician my whole life. Not for a company at that point, for myself. Hollis Electrical. 12 years in business, mostly commercial and light industrial. A few residential contracts. Reliable, steady work. I had a crew of 4. Nobody at work knew what had happened at home, and I didn't tell them. I showed up at 6:30, managed the jobs, answered the phone, wrote the estimates. I was professional because the work required it, and because the work was the only thing I was certain of. By the second week, I had found a furnished apartment in a 2-story complex off Route 9. Not impressive. Beige walls, carpet that had seen better decades, a kitchen window that looked directly into the parking lot. But it had a full bathroom, a working stove, and no one in it who had opinions about my coffee. I paid first and last month and felt, for the first time in weeks, like I could exhale. I drove back to the house on Carver Road one Saturday morning while my wife was at her sister's. I had arranged it to my attorney, who had begun the legal separation process. I retrieved the remainder of my personal belongings, my remaining tools from the shed, and a box of files from the basement office. Derek was home. He stood in the kitchen doorway while I worked, and didn't offer to help, and didn't say a word. When I carried the last box to my truck, I looked at him once. He looked away first. There was no satisfaction in it, just completion. The legal process took the better part of a year. My wife had an attorney. I had an attorney. We had both contributed to the house, financially and in labor, and my documentation of the work I had done turned out to matter more than I expected. 37 pages of photographs, receipts, permit records, and contractor invoices, all with my name on them. My attorney called it unusually thorough. I called it 33 years of habit. The divorce was finalized 14 months after I left. I didn't receive the house. She bought out my equity. It was fair, legally. It didn't feel like anything, actually. By that point, I had started to understand that what I had lost wasn't really the building. It was the story I had been telling myself about it. I had told myself that work was love, that repairing things was a way of saying, "I'm here, I'm invested, I'm not going anywhere. What I learned is that not everyone reads that language, and that not everyone deserves to. The apartment on Route 9 became something I hadn't expected. It became mine. I bought a real bed frame, a decent couch. I put up a pegboard in the kitchen for tools the way I'd always wanted. I cooked, which I had mostly stopped doing in the last few years of my marriage because Derek had a strong opinion about smells and my wife had stopped pushing back. I made the coffee as strong as I wanted. I kept working. Hollis Electrical did well. We landed a school district contract for electrical upgrades across 4 buildings, the kind of multi-year work that anchors a small business. I hired a 5th person. I paid off the company truck. And then I did something I had been thinking about for a long time. I started teaching. The local community college had an apprenticeship prep program, young people trying to get into the trades. They needed instructors with field experience. I went in on Tuesday evenings. The students were mostly in their 20s, a few older career changers. They wanted to know how electrical work actually worked in the field, not just the code book. I wasn't a natural teacher at first. I talked too fast, assumed too much, but I kept going back, and somewhere in the 2nd semester something clicked. A 23-year-old named Marcus stayed after class to ask about a wiring question he couldn't figure out from the textbook, and I spent 45 minutes at the whiteboard going through it with him. And he understood it. And I went home and sat in my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Useful, not just competent. Useful. The program director asked me to develop a full 12-week curriculum for residential and light commercial wiring. I spent the following summer writing it. It was the most careful writing I had ever done. I wanted it to be correct, not just good enough. I wanted the people who learned from it to be safe. The college named the curriculum after the program, not after me. That was fine. It was being used. That was what mattered. I had been teaching for about 2 years when the program director mentioned that a regional trade publication was doing a feature on workforce development in the skilled trades. They wanted to profile people who were contributing to the pipeline. She submitted my name. The article ran in the spring of my 3rd year in the apartment. It was in the Tri-State Contractor Review, not a major publication, but well read in the industry. They ran a photo of me at the whiteboard with 3 students. The headline said something about addressing the skilled trade shortage through experience sharing. I was quoted once. I said something about how the best thing a working electrician can do is not retire his knowledge with his tools. I didn't think much of it at the time. I shared it on LinkedIn because my business attorney told me I should maintain a professional profile. That was the extent of it. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I was grading student assessments at my kitchen table when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. A connection request from my ex-wife. I stared at it for a moment, then I set the phone face down and finished the assessment I was working on. Then I picked the phone back up and accepted the request, because I wanted to see what she would say. She messaged within the hour. She said she had seen the article. She said you'd always known I had this in me. She said that Derek and her daughter had since separated, and things had been difficult. But that seeing what I had built had reminded her of the man she married. She said she thought about me often. She asked if I would be open to coffee sometime. I read it twice. She had always known I had this in me. I thought about November 4 years earlier. The kitchen table. The duffel bag. The cold driveway. The way she had looked down at the table instead of answering my question. I thought about the text message she sent the Monday morning after. That was not okay, she had said, because I separated the finances. Not a single message asking where I was sleeping. Not one. I thought about what my attorney had told me during the proceedings, that my wife's daughter and son-in-law had still been living in the house as of the filing date, that Derek had still been unemployed, that the electrical work I had done, the work that had been documented and counted in the settlement, was the reason I received any equity at all. I didn't respond that evening. I called Glenn instead. She reached out, I said. Of course she did, he said. Of course she did, he said. There's a newspaper article, and your name attached to something real. You're not the guy who got pushed out anymore. You're the guy who built something. I said, that's what I keep telling myself it is. He said, Ray, that's what it actually is. I went to LinkedIn the next morning and typed a response. I kept it short. I told her I was glad she was doing well. I told her I hoped the situation with her daughter was resolving. I told her I didn't think coffee was a good idea, but that I wished her well. She replied within minutes. She says she understood. but that she wanted me to know she regretted how things ended. She says she should have stood up for me more. She said Derek had been difficult, and she had been scared of losing her daughter's family, and she had made choices she wasn't proud of. I appreciated that. I want to be honest about that. It mattered to receive it. But it didn't change the arithmetic. I typed my response slowly. I told her that I believed her. I told her that I had believed her. I told her that I understood fear and I understood wanting to hold a family together. I told her that what I needed her to understand was that I had been in that house, working on it, investing in it, for 11 years, that I had not left. I had been asked to go. And the story that got told afterward, the version where I needed space, the version where it was mutual, the version that her friends had apparently received, that version had cost me something I couldn't fully quantify. I told her that she didn't owe me anything, that the settlement was fair and the legal process had been civil, and I held no anger toward her, but that I also would not pretend the truth was something other than what it was, not for her comfort, not for her daughter's, not for anyone's. She was quiet for most of that day. Late in the evening, she sent one more message. She said, "You're right, I told people it was mutual because I couldn't explain it otherwise. I was ashamed of what I had asked you to do. I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it. I didn't think you'd have trouble landing. You always seem so solid." I read that last sentence 3 times. You always seem so solid. I thought about 34 degrees. I thought about the Chevy in the parking lot behind Glenn's neighborhood grocery store, where I'd sat for 20 minutes on night 1, just sitting, because I didn't know where to drive. I thought about depositing my first solo paycheck into an account with only my name on it and feeling something complicated that took me a year to name, which was grief. Solid isn't the same as invulnerable, I typed back. Cable isn't the same as okay. She said she knew that now. I put the phone down and sat in my apartment. The pegboard in the kitchen had grown crowded with tools over the years. The bookshelves I had built along the living room wall held textbooks, code manuals, a few novels I had gotten into in the second year. The apartment smelled like coffee and sawdust, and something I had started burning in a small cast iron pan on Sunday mornings that my neighbor had told me was cedar. It was mine. All of it. Every object had arrived there because I had chosen it. A week after the LinkedIn exchange, I was back in the classroom on a Tuesday evening. Marcus, who had since completed the program and gotten into a union apprenticeship, had come back to talk to the current cohort about his first year in the field. He stood up in front of the room and talked about what he wished he had known, and at one point he said, "The one thing this program gave me that the textbooks didn't was a person who took it seriously." He nodded toward me. He said, "Somebody thought it was worth passing on. That changes how you see the work." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Later, walking to the parking lot, Marcus said, "You doing okay? You seemed a little somewhere else tonight." I said I was good. I said someone had reached out from a previous chapter and I had been working through what to do with it. He asked if I figured it out. I said I think so. "I think you closed the chapter without tearing the page." He nodded like that made sense to a 24-year-old. And maybe it did. Her daughter never reached out. I didn't expect her to. Derek certainly didn't. There are people who move through other people's lives leaving damage. They genuinely do not register as damage, and you can spend a long time waiting for acknowledgement that isn't coming. I stopped waiting somewhere in the second year. I stopped tracking it entirely by the third. What I know now, 4.5 years after that November driveway, is that the story I was living in was not the story I was being assigned. The story I was being assigned was a story of a man who had grown difficult, inflexible, unable to accommodate a changing household. The story being told at family gatherings while I was driving back to Route 9 alone. The story that made my absence easier to digest. The story I was actually living was different. It was a man who worked every day, built a business, found a classroom, taught people something real, and slowly, without ceremony, became someone that young electricians drive an hour to have coffee with when they need advice. Those two stories cannot both be true. One of them gets to be the record. I'm choosing mine. I still drive past the house on Carver Road sometimes, not to look at anything in particular. Mostly by habit, it's on the way from the college to my apartment if I take the longer route. The deck I built along the back of that house isn't visible from the street, but I know it's there. The electrical system I put in is still running every light and outlet in that building. My work is woven into the walls of a place that no longer has my name on the deed, and that used to bother me more than it does now. Now I think about it differently. I think some things you build stay even after you leave. And some things you build go with you, no matter what. The curriculum I wrote is going into its fourth year. The college has enrolled over 200 students in it. Some of them are working journeymen now. Some are in their apprenticeships. A few have started their own operations. They don't all know my name. That's fine. I know what I built. And this time, nobody else gets to write the caption. If this story found you at a moment when you're being told your absence would be the solution, I want you to hear one thing. The people asking you to leave are not qualified to determine your value. That is not their assessment to make. You are allowed to go quietly, get solid, and let your work speak at full volume later. Don't vanish. Don't wait for permission. Just build the thing they assumed you couldn't. I'm 65 now. I still drive the Silverado. I make strong coffee every morning. My name is Ray Hollis, and I was never the problem. If you've been there, if you know that driveway feeling, tell me where you're watching from. This channel is for men who don't say much but carry a lot. Subscribe and stay close. We have more of these.